thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. I'm excited tonight because I have in the studio Mr. Jamil Nathaniel, and I'm excited because he gets to tell the story of 36 years doing Fed time. He is he's the guest that's had the longest prison stint that we've ever talked to. He was brought by none other than co-host Danny Sneed, who met him through the Path to Freedom. I'm really excited tonight because we get to ask a lot about Jamil's life, and hopefully he can take us through a path to understand the federal system. He knows more about the federal system than I do, and I've tried a lot of federal cases, but the first case I ever tried federally was in 1998. Wow. And so federal law is enacted by Congress. So your House of Representatives that are fighting now about Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act, those are the people who wrote the federal laws that control federal time and federal prisons and federal punishment and federal violations of the law. And they also wrote the federal sentencing guidelines that I'm sure you've heard about. But the interesting thing about Jamil is that there were no sentencing guidelines in 1981 when he was sentenced to 100 years in the federal prison, which is also known as the Bureau of Prisons. So the acronyms that you'll see when it's federal is BOP, capital B, capital O, capital P. And if you ever see that written when someone's in trouble, you know that's Fed time. Isn't that what we know?
That's correct.
That's Fed time. So thank you for sharing your story. I'm really excited about your story. And like everybody else has books, I hope one day that we have a book for you too. Yeah. But Jamil, tell us about you and where you started. I know you said you were born in Memphis, so tell me about Memphis.
Memphis at the time, when I was a youngster growing up in Memphis, was a really nice place. My parents was rather protective. They did not want us to be a part of anything dealing with the protests and the civil rights things that was going on at that time. My mother was definitely a pro-Martin Luther King guy, but you know, Malcolm X and all of this other things was going on at the time. And she didn't want us to know anything about Malcolm. She didn't like him. She didn't like the way he spoke, and so on. So we were somewhat protected on one side of knowing one side of what was going on in America. And also Memphis is a very popular place of civil rights and so on.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if I may ask, how old are you?
I'm 61. I'll be 62 this year.
Amen. 61, 62 this year. When's your birthday?
December the 20th.
Oh, wow. Wow. So what year does that mean you were born?
1955.
55. Okay. Well, you're just 3 years older than I am. All right. So tell me, you said you're one of 6 children. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me what happened. When did you first find yourself getting in any little trouble?
Well, now I'm going to tell you something very... Actually, I had a very creative childhood. I had my other 2 little siblings. Actually, I saw them one day, and they always had candy. And I asked them, I said, where did you get the candy from? And they say, Chinese guy, Mr. Choo Choo, and so on, gave it to us. So I was curious enough to want to know, who is Mr. Choo Choo? So I followed them. And they showed me a grocery store. They went inside the grocery store and they were stealing candy.
Wow.
So Mr. Choo Choo wasn't giving the candy.
Yeah.
They were taking the candy.
They were taking the candy.
And of course, they must have been a lot more smarter than I were, because I ended up getting caught. Mm. All right.
How old do you think you were?
At that time, I was probably about 8 years old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's an 8-year-old ploy. Anybody can do that. Kids in the store, you know, they want everything they see, actually, no matter what socioeconomic group they're from.
And that was my first time in having a contact with a police officer.
Wow.
They called the police and had my parents come pick me up and gave me a good lecturing and all of that. I went home and had to take a lecture from my mother and my father at the time.
Those were the days.
Yes. And they scared me enough where I didn't have any more trouble until I moved to St. Louis.
So tell me about that. Why did you start getting in trouble, or why did you get in trouble for the first time in St. Louis?
St. Louis was a lot more challenging to live. And we moved into an area that was urban city community. First of all, they did not like us because we came from the South. A lot of the peoples out of St. Louis, they are not really, they don't gravitate to strange peoples or peoples outside, outsiders. So, and by us having a Southern accent, I was called country, you know, even as a child. My second day coming out of school, a group of boys tried to jump on myself and my brother. And of course, I felt it was better for me to fight than not. My brother, he ran, and I sit there and I fought them. And I got whooped. So
At least you fought them.
yes, I fought, and the next day, the same thing. So I informed my older brothers what was going on. So they used to come to the school, but they always get to the school a little too late. So one particular day, I decided this is it. I went out that evening, and I took a brick and I put it down in one place. I took another stick and I put it in another place. And then all the way up to the school, I took a club and I put it right inside the bushes. So as soon as I came out of school and they came at me, I already had strategically where I'm going to receive my weapons to fight them until I got home.
I like that.
So
Wow.
later, when this thing started going on, I started getting with other guys who they was also picking on. And I told them, I said, we need to stand up against these guys.
Uh-oh.
Wow. I
Gang
like
leader
that.
now.
Uh-oh.
So many of them, they was afraid. They didn't want to get involved. So we went to their house. I decided, let's go to their house where they live at. And when they came outside, started attacking them.
So you got a group of guys that
Right,
were unafraid enough to,
right.
they had been bullied too, I guess.
But they was afraid. They didn't really help that much. But
You and your brother did.
no, that was pretty much me. And the guys, they was there, but they didn't swing or anything. So, but that was my first experience in
How'd
doing
that
something.
turn out? Did that surprise tactic stop them from beating
Yes,
up everybody?
I had no other problems after then.
Okay.
I could go to school and walk home with no problem.
Okay.
But then I started having a problem with the older guys.
Okay.
Once I was on my way to the cleaners, a group of older guys, they weren't even in school. I'm in grade school at the time. They came over and took my clothes,
Wow.
Dang.
you know.
Oh, that's gangster in St. Louis.
So I asked for my clothes back, and they wouldn't give it back. So I had to go and tell my mother and my brothers and them, and we went around in the city looking for those guys. 3 days later, we see the guy going down the street with the pants on,
Dang.
you know. So
That is a rough life for a
he
young
pulled
kid
up
to
on the
grow
guy and told him that those my brother's pants. He want those pants right now. The pants have been dirty. He had been wearing them for about 2 or 3 days. And we went to his house. He went inside the house, changed clothes, and gave him the pants.
Oh, he gave him the pants.
Right, but we couldn't get the other clothes back. You know, he said that some of his other friends had them and all of that. But yeah, St. Louis is a very challenging place to live, especially for a young person growing up. Right now, it wasn't a lot of guns on the street at that time.
Right.
You know,
And that's so interesting to me. Back in the 60s, how it wasn't a lot of guns, but yet everybody had a gun. People had the right to bear arms. There weren't guns in my house, but people just didn't kill each other. They'd fight.
That's right.
You know, they would fist fight. Or maybe pick up sticks, and like you say, bricks, and maybe
That's
hit
correct.
somebody's head against the curb, which was violent and would make
Yes,
you
correct.
bloody.
Yeah.
But people just wasn't trying to kill each other.
Or how common it was for people to have long guns in their trucks.
right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. My
On
daddy was a
racks.
rifleman, yeah, with the
And,
rifle. But they had handguns. I mean, my father had handguns, but people just wasn't trying to kill kids didn't think about killing each other. They just thought about getting somebody off of them to fight them. You know what I mean? But people
Sure.
weren't trying to kill each other. It's a different time.
I think that crack epidemic really changed,
it changed
the
game.
atmosphere
It
of
changed the game.
everything.
Yeah, it changed the atmosphere.
That new Jack City movie that they had on TV, it actually became a reality.
Right.
And I don't really think it was Americans that were quick to kill. My experience when the crack cocaine era came in Dallas is the Jamaicans. They ruled on the streets when you broke a code was to kill you. But in black neighborhoods, when people broke, they would beat you up. Say if you gave me dope to sell and I ran off with the money. well, when they find me, they're gonna beat me up real bad. Well, the Jamaicans, when someone wronged them, they killed them.
Wow.
And so it kind of, I'm not saying that was just in Texas. So what started happening is people start using that as a code. If you break the code, death was the response or the consequences, and they stopped beating people up.
When I grew up in San Antonio, it wasn't no Jamaicans doing nothing like that. It was, I mean, we were poor. The black people there were poor, and there were some bad things going on. Because I grew up, when we grew up, it was more like heroin and dropping pills.
Right.
You know, mine was army related, and but it wasn't no cocaine.
Right.
And the Colombians, you know, the Colombian cartel, they code was the neckties and all that. They were brutal.
We didn't see that in our communities.
No.
It was just black folks selling dope in the black communities and on the corners that would beat you up and take your lunch money. If we walked through the projects to school, they'd take your money on the way through.
Right.
But, you know, my daddy would go and equalize that, because my daddy was crazy. And so he would go, if they took my cousin's bike, my daddy would go get the bikes.
Right.
You know, he was that kind of roughneck like them. But we didn't have problems from other communities because it was segregated then. And so, you know, the black people in the black communities, the Hispanics, I mean, we kind of had a little mingling, and the whites, but it wasn't much mingling. And so everybody kind of had their own codes.
I don't remember any mingling in my neighborhoods.
Yeah, it wasn't mingling. So it was all black. So it was the black code.
All blacks.
Well, you know what I found interesting about his story? When we talk about the violence, like in Chicago, the black-on-black crime, that he's talking about even in the late 50s,
This is the 60s.
how black on black, I wouldn't call it a crime, but how they were victimizing each other.
Let me tell you this, that's always gone on, but I think one of the differences I see just living it like you is that our parents were more afraid of the police. You know, the police wasn't all in your life like they are now. You know, the cops are all in everybody's life in these integrated communities, but back then, the cops just did not come to your community unless it was something really bad. And all the older people, because they knew of lynchings and people leaving and being disappeared. Because, you know, my daddy was born in 1919 in Louisiana. He's seen people lynched up.
That's right.
And in my mother in 1922, and my grandmother was alive, who was born in 1897. People just didn't want the cops in their life.
They didn't trust them.
Well, it wasn't even about trust. It was like they're deathly afraid of them, like they're more the enemy, and so they didn't do things to cause the cops to come in. So I believe that's why people didn't use weapons. I think that's why people I don't know this, but I'm just thinking, remember my father and just remember things. I think that's why people more beat each other up, but because when you get to shooting, the cops coming. You see what I'm saying? Right. So I just don't I think it was more segregated, and you didn't want those cops in your community.
Right.
You just didn't want them there.
Well, actually, in the later history, present that the sheriff and the police was journeying with the KKK.
Right.
They was all together. When we got beat up, we go to the police and we say, well, this guy beat us up and this guy is white. The police was on their side.
But the guy that was beating you up wasn't white.
I know, he was.
But I'm just saying, but why didn't y'all call the police? I'm just trying
to
deal with that time period.
Because of the tradition of the black community not being involved with the police because of the history from the South.
And I don't think they'd shoot. So like right now, people just shoot and don't care. But back then, people did not. I don't think we went to guns because we had the guns. I just don't think people did it because I think everybody was taught to keep the police out your life. And if you do a gun, police come into your life.
Or can I say that people value life more, that they saw your life had more value than the taking?
I think they were more scared of the police, but you can say that. But I'm just saying, I think I just remember how my daddy acted. He didn't want a ticket. He was deathly afraid of the police. And he was a bad dude in the black community, but he was definitely
in the Great
afraid.
Depression era, it hit the black community hard.
Right, and my daddy was part of that, in the
So
30s.
At that time, a lot of blacks decided to make ends meet, as they call it. So you had people start doing things against the law, but it was acceptable. But we didn't bring the police involved. So we just kept this in-house. Like they was running tickets, selling booze on Sunday, after-hour clubs, and things of this nature. But later on in life, coming up, it became a way of life for, you know that your uncle runs a crap house.
Right.
and he sell booze and so on. But
Yeah, you don't want the police there.
You
So
don't
you're going
want-
to try to keep things under the
Exactly.
radar. You don't want to bring a lot of attention. My dad used to have people doing craps at his place.
Right.
He had horses. They stalled their horses. He had a
Exactly.
little gambling shack. They didn't want the police in their life. I'm just telling you that. So
Yeah.
they tried to police themselves so that it didn't ratchet up to something. Because if somebody gets shot, the police are coming. So they didn't want the police
So
in
it
their
would be
life.
probably pretty much frowned on if you was the person that called the police to the neighborhood.
Well, you just don't know
for
what's happening. You
domestic-
call the police, and you might be the one going to jail.
That's correct.
See, that's the problem. It wasn't. It was just a different time. But let's get back on your story. So then, tell me. You told me before we aired that at 15 you got in trouble looking for girls. What does that mean? How
Okay.
did that happen?
At 15, I became interested in girls around about 14. Around about 14, we moved to the county of Richmond Heights. And that was a little shocking because actually, as a teenager, moving from one school to another one, then you have to make friends all over again. And I thought it was going to be more like what happened in the city. So I was looking for confrontation on day one when I moved to the county. But I also was looking for female companionship too. So I'm attracted to the females at this time. And but I had a fight, I think, on my second day of school. But going back to the aspect of what happened at 15, as I became more attracted to females and we would meet up, of course, my parents wouldn't let me go out at night like that.
Right.
So I would have to sneak out.
Right.
And sneaking out of the house, you have to go through the neighborhood to get to the girl house. And actually, when you get to the girl house, you might be running across other people along the way. And generally, and I'm really convinced of this now, the people that generally hangs out at night, running around at night, they're looking for things to do.
Bad things. Is it trouble?
Yes. So I started meeting other guys that hanging out at night. Their parents probably didn't care about them coming out at night, because many of them parents wasn't like my parents. My parents were very guarding of what time you have to be in and so on. So I got to meet some of these individuals that was night prowlers, as you might say, and they was introducing me to a whole different world. And then at 15, I was really curious about knowing a lot more about life. Since my family had been one of those, they try to exclude you from learning certain things. And there were certain things that I wanted to know more about anyway. Same thing is being done today. You find that our community, of the African American community, we don't talk about the Islamic side of the African American community. We only talk about the Christian side. And we only persuade our people to go with Christianity. But we don't really bring the two together and say, well, we have a history, all the way dating back to slavery, where two of them was there, Islamic and Christianity. And we still bring this great divide in our country today amongst especially our black community. We have a lot of young blacks growing up today who look at the religion as being passive, and then they like this radical thing that's going on over here.
And we're going to get to that, but let's get back to 15.
Okay.
So tell me how you got in trouble the first time.
Okay, the first time I got in trouble were, actually, I was with some friends of mine, and we was coming out of school.
You in high school?
Junior high school.
Junior high school, okay.
Right? And some more white guys came out, and they was calling us the N-word, and I wouldn't run. I stood there and fought, and they ran. And I picked up a brick, and I hit the guy with the brick. And the police came. So, of course, they explained to me that I could have ended up putting that guy out and everything.
Right.
And I told them that he had a chain, but they didn't. They said they didn't see a chain in the guy's hand. So
But he did have a chain?
Yeah, he did have a chain. But that was my encounter with the law enforcement at 15.
What happened to you?
Actually, they didn't do too much to me. They turned me over to my parents and everything. But I went to jail on a burglary at 17.
And tell me about that.
Some of these guys that I had met in the neighborhood.
The night prowlers?
The night prowlers, yes. One of them had a car, and he was like 17 with his own car.
Wow.
It was a hot rod.
Wow.
And at that time, they were stopping and going to get some cigarettes. And they knew of this store. We broke into a confectionery store. And I was supposed to be in the lookout guy. And I seen a person coming down the street. I went to the window. I looked in. I tried to tell them that someone was coming. They didn't hear me. And I did the dummy thing, and I climbed in.
With them?
With them.
Okay.
And dummy, yes. And it ended up, the guy saw me going in there, so he called the police, and the police ended up coming and arrested all of us.
Why are you laughing, Dan?
No, I'm just saying, I mean, you know, it is what it is. I mean, because when you're young, you just make decisions that you have to live with the consequences. You look back in hindsight, and like he said, it was not a very smart move, but the moves we were making not based on smart. We was just
At 17,
caught up.
At 17 in East St. Louis, or in St. Louis, were you a juvenile or were you an adult?
At 17, you're considered as an adult.
Every state is different, so that's what I want
Yes.
to know. In Texas, you're 17, you're an adult.
Right, but they have a law in Missouri that, actually this was when I was in Missouri at 17 when I got arrested for the burglary. They have a law that once you're out of jail and you're on probation, once your probation clear up, so does your record. And they all,
Is that the record? That's the law now, that's what it was then?
that's what it were then.
Okay.
Now, all of those cases that you had at the age of 17 will be removed from your record if you abide by the law once you was released from prison.
So you got probation.
Yes,
Did you
I
do
did 2 years probation.
Okay. Successfully?
Yes,
What? Okay. that's
2 years
good.
probation and 1 year in city jail. And when they did the fingerprints, they found out that I was also involved in a car theft and the county. So I did
Was it true?
another year. Yes.
Had you done it?
Yes, it was my neighbor car. Yes.
So you were being kind of treacherous then, stealing your neighbor's car?
Yeah. So
What was going on in your mind? Why did you do that at that age?
I think more so want to be a part. Second, making decisions on your own for the first time, and actually those decisions that you're making, you're thinking you're making decision, but is this
Back
really,
then, when you have a mother like that, I mean, your mother's just gonna say, "Boy, don't get in trouble. I'm not coming to that jail to get you out. I'm working too hard. I can't do it."
Right.
What was your response to warnings like that your mother must have given you?
Well, actually, the issue of going to jail and so on, it was always blamed on the other guys.
Oh, you
There was
did,
a
or your
bad,
mother did?
my mother, she said there was a bad influence on me.
Right. That's what all mothers tell me. Every mother ever
so
hired
they
me said it.
enable you
Every
to
mother that I
continue to do
know has told me that it's somebody else's fault. I have rarely heard in my life that
Right.
it was their child's fault. It's always running with the wrong crowd. That's every mother's discussion.
Right.
Because mothers can't, because I think mothers, and I'd probably do the same thing, I think mothers feel like if the child is doing wrong, then they failed somehow. They can't separate the umbilical cord, so they think that it's their fault. So mothers can't,
Sure.
it
It's a
can't be
great
their
burden.
fault, so they have to put it
Sure.
on the friends.
Sure, it's a great burden
Because it's like I raised him to
not do this.
not do this. So if he's doing it, somebody else got to be influencing him. They can't think that the child that they raised
Or it's a
would do
manipulator.
something like that. It's a manipulator or is the ringleader. I would never think that about my daughter.
But did you have to say that your father was in the home at the time?
At the
in
beginning.
Memphis. in
Yeah,
Memphis.
that's why
Oh,
they
okay.
moved. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
you got to read between the lines on that one.
Yeah.
So that's why when they moved, that was why they moved.
Yeah.
Because when they moved, you don't hear no daddy no more.
That's right.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
no,
That's right.
I already read that.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so you stole your neighbor's car. I know your mother didn't want you to do it. What about your siblings? Since you had 6 of you, were they doing wrong too?
No, not to my knowledge, because
So how could you be the lone wolf doing the wrong things when you had older brothers that weren't doing it?
well, we wasn't that close. We wasn't that close.
What about your sisters?
My sisters, we was there in the same house, but we really wasn't communicating with each other like that.
But when you're that poor and it's that many of y'all, got to be sleeping in the same beds.
No, actually, okay, in the basement, in the basement area, we sectioned it off to like twin beds in the far back. That's where myself and my younger brother, we slept.
So y'all slept in separate beds, but still in the same area right there.
Up front, in the front part of the basement was sectioned off where my two sisters slept.
Okay.
Right? And there was this youngest one. The older brothers at the time, they had their own apartment.
Okay.
My older sister, she was already married.
Okay.
And so on. So it was basically the younger ones that were still there.
The 4. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I got you. So let's move on. So you did your year in the city, 2 years of probation, successfully completed.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next case you pick up?
The next case I picked up was a robbery case, stealing from a person.
And tell me about that.
Another friend of mine, we got together and we ended up sticking a guy up. Well, actually, we just took his money.
Was it the same person that you did the burglary with at the store?
No. The burglary guys, we never saw each other again.
Wow. So how did you meet this guy that you did the robbery with?
Up by the young lady that I was actually messing around as dating, that I have a child by.
Okay.
Now, well, at that time I did. I still have a child today by.
That's good.
And I met some more peoples up in that area, and in that area there, we really wasn't friends, but we started hanging out together. And
How old were you with the robbery case?
I guess I was about 19.
About 19.
I'm curious, by this time, do you see yourself more as a leader than a follower?
I saw myself as a dummy, more of a follower, more of a person who had a fantasy. Listen, I think I had a fantasy. I wanted to show people that I was smart, but showing myself how dumb I were. Mm. 2, I wanted to show that I was brave enough to do something that was dumb for me to do. My rational skills of understanding the
risk versus reward.
Right, wasn't there. And in actuality, I don't understand right today why I had such low value on my life.
You don't understand that?
Right today.
So with the robbery case, how much time did you get?
I ended up doing a year for that, yeah.
Okay, what's the next case?
The next case is the case that I just went to prison on.
Okay, so if I'm adding up right, at 19, when you get the robbery case with another dude, that's like 1972. Mm-hmm. So you go to the big house, the federal prison in 1981, that's 9 years. So I know you spent another year in prison, so you get out at about 20. What's going on? I mean, because you had
struggling,
about 8 good to do right.
Right.
8 years to do right.
Struggling, trying to find work, and basically finding part-time work here, part-time work there, maintenance type of jobs and things of that nature. Of course, you know, you always dip and dive and try to sell some drugs along the way, you know. You always get this marvelous, great ideal that, you know, I could take the money that I'm making off the job, go and buy me a pound of marijuana.
Get rich, queen.
And
but
sell
back then
the
it's marijuana. It's nothing real serious.
It's nothing, yeah. So it was more on that tip, but that kept you in that loop.
Right.
You know, so keeping you in the loop, and what I mean by the loop is in the loop of the people that you are involved with, and so on. So, and then
you graduated high school, right?
Actually, the right before junior year, they came to the school and arrested me for that case.
The fighting or the burglary?
The robbery case.
The robbery where you're 19, okay.
Right. That guy told on me.
Oh, the one you robbed with.
Right. The guy identified him, but he didn't identify me. So he got arrested. Then later he told them that it was me. I also with him. So they came to the school and arrested me.
In the law in Texas is that that's not enough to convict someone. So if one person gets arrested and he tells on them, the law in Texas is you have to have something to connect them outside of a co-conspirator statement. That's what it's called. It's a technical word. So just your statement, it has to be something more. Mm-hmm. in Texas.
How do I know that when they scaring me and they got me in the interrogation room telling me, we know you did it, he says you did it, and if you don't confess, we're going to give you 3 life sentences.
Police officers are allowed to use whatever tactics they want. So that's why they tell you that you have a right to remain silent and anything you say will be used against you. So you can either take that advice that they're constitutionally required to do it. In Texas, they tell you that. They record it when they give it to you. It's required by law. So if you want to tell it, then you do. But I'm just saying they have a right to lie to you to get you to confess because they're not on trial. They're not the ones that did wrong. So I'm just letting you know that there has to be something to connect you to something. And what it sounds like in a case like his, it wasn't at first. Now, if they wouldn't scared him and he confessed, that's one thing. But there are a lot of people who don't confess, and then the police have to find something to connect you with. That's why sometimes you see. That's why sometimes you see people getting away. You're like, well, they did it together, but one of them got away and one of them doing life. It's because the one doing life might have told it, but they don't have anything else to connect them with it. So you see what I'm saying? Because that's the law. Because they don't want to rely on hearsay. Because just think, if the law allows you to do that, then everybody gets caught would blame it on somebody else.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So that's why it has to be some trustworthiness in it. So it can be something real small. Like right now, today, it's real easy to connect people to when a co-conspirator says something. Because what is there that connects everybody?
DNA.
No.
What?
I'm gonna let the man been in prison 36 years and got out this year to see if he knows.
Actually, ask the question again.
What connects people now? So when you went to prison, they wouldn't have, and when you were 19 in 1973 or 1972, there would have been nothing to connect.
Okay.
Because the identifier identified your fall partner, your co-conspirator. He told it on you. So in Texas, when would it be that, what is it now that didn't exist in 1972? No, let's get rid of that. Because the eyewitness said it was the fall partner, right? The eyewitness couldn't identify you.
But,
So
but he knew that someone else was there.
What exists that doesn't, because they got to know who it is. In Texas, they got to identify you. What exists now that didn't exist in 1972?
Security cameras.
Yeah, and the cameras, of course.
Well, that is one, but that's not it, because every company doesn't have a security phone, a cell phone. They didn't have cell phones in 1972. Now, if your fall partner says that I did it with Danny, so if I get caught and I say I did it with Danny, but the guy can only identify me, they can then use what I said as probable cause to get a search warrant to go and search Danny's phone. And if they search your phone and see that by the cell towers we were at that place at that time, then that would connect you.
Because they can place me at a time.
Every time we talk on the phone, you're on a cell tower that's in the vicinity of where you are. So if they can place you, so now it's a GPS. Cell phones are GPSs, and so they will always know where you are. So now, because of cell phones, everybody gets busted. Because the cell phone, if we do a shootout tonight, and I want to say I wasn't there, I got a cell phone. So all they got to do is get a search warrant. They have to have a probable cause to get a search warrant, but your fall partner saying you were there is enough. Right. Then they can get a search warrant and place you there, especially if the phone is in your name. Now, a lot of times, like if it's your child or something, you might have. I have like 5 phones in my name because I got 2 in my office, old office. I've gotten some from family members, and so all the phones are going to say my name, even though it might be there. So this is a little more difficult when you don't know. But the thing is, once you see who's communicating between each other, then they know that I'm not talking to some 19-year-old. You know what I mean? So they know it's got to be my child doing it. You see what I'm saying? And then the co-conspirator can still say, I was talking to him on the phone, like right before we went, he came and picked me up. So they can look at all of that.
And collaborating.
It's what gets everybody now. And kids will do crimes. They'll put it on Facebook. All the boys together will be shooting signs. They might not say what they did, but later that night, just like you, if you did a crime, your ass is busted because all you do is stay on the phone. So, I mean, you would connect yourself to everything. I'm not saying it bad, but I'm just saying you always on it. So people know that if they just grab your phone and your iPad, they'll know exactly where you are because all your friends can testify. He's always on his cell phone. He's always on his cell phone. And so I'm just saying those kind of people, and kids are always on their cell phones and they don't have landlines. So everything that gets them now, they busted. That's how they solve murders now and everything because if you say you weren't there in this area and you had no reason, if you don't have a relative in that apartment complex, that cell tower is going to say where you were.
Yeah, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing.
It's a good thing, it's a bad thing, but it's a good thing for crime.
Right.
It's a good thing for law enforcement.
Right.
Law enforcement is doing a great job with phones. And the thing that's so interesting is that the young generation couldn't get away from the phones.
Right.
There's some OGs that don't use no phones, but they just use landlines because they know better. But the youngsters cannot separate. Let me tell you, I had a client last year, and this is off the subject, but you can actually, people are getting these pill meals from China, All that's on Google, on their
Mm-hmm.
phone, where they looked it up. Even the formula for making pills, because everything they do, the history is there on their phone.
Right.
And people who, and there's technology that officers have that they crack all of that out with. No matter how much you delete it, it's still there. And they have the technology to get it out. It started with the feds. My first Fed case in 1998 that I tried with some rappers, the feds had the cell phone towers then. They were
Yeah.
using that then. It wasn't prevalent in state court then. It's
Right.
prevalent everywhere now. But in 98, because you know, one of the things that gangsters or people in a life of crime don't understand is the United States created the internet. The federal government created the internet. So you can't out
Right.
you can't
The
outget
computer
them.
started with them, and they passed.
It ain't even just a computer. It's the internet. The internet is not the computer, because that can be on a phone. I'm talking about,
okay.
you know, Bill Gates, you know, once really started the IBM ones, and then you know, that's not the computer. They had those before they had the internet. So when you first had a computer, it just did your work. It was like a typewriter. It was a computer. A computer is not the internet.
Okay.
The internet is separate. But the federal government and NASA, they created the internet. And so there's nothing that you can do that the federal government can't crack, because they created it. And so, you know, if that's your technology, then you know everything that it does, right?
Right.
So anyway,
The big change of the federal government and the Justice Department was J. Edgar Hoover.
yeah.
The way he looked at crime and criminals. You know, he has a
He broke the
statement
law a
that
lot,
he
but-
wrote. He said, in order to catch a criminal, you have to think like a
You got
criminal.
to be a criminal, right?
And then he said, when you catch him, no matter what evidence you have to make evidence to convict him.
Well, we try not to use the J. Edgar Hoover way now. We try to follow
But
the
many
law.
of them, they do.
Well, the good thing is now with law enforcement is that, like I said, the cell phones tell you everything you've done. So if you don't have a cell phone, it would be just as hard. People would have a lot of unsolved murders and a lot of unsolved things. But with Crime Stoppers and tips and anonymous tips that
Yeah.
really are anonymous, back in the day, they didn't have those at 72.
Right.
But now you got 2 or 3 girlfriends. You like women. Women would be your downfall, because if you got 2 or 3 of them
That's
and you did a
over with,
crime and you told one of them and they get mad at you, then they gonna tell what they know that you did, and that's Crime Stoppers tips. They didn't have that in 1972.
Well, that's true. You know, but I've learned to be a lot more disciplined when it comes to chasing winners.
Let's talk about this before we go, because this time is running. It's always interesting to have these long conversations. But I want to know, what was the crime that got you in trouble to be sentenced to 100 years and to do 36 actual years?
Yes. I went to a party in an apartment complex, in a townhouse apartment complex that I was living in. And went to a party, and it appears that I got in trouble with a young lady there.
Okay.
They had been giving her some drugs. She was really hyped and everything. So people were making comments. I made a comment. She used the N-word and called me some names.
So
and
she was
on.
not black?
No.
Okay.
And then she stabbed me, once in the side, once in the arm, and I took the knife and I stabbed her back.
Wow.
Actually, she died, bled to death.
Okay.
Then I took the body and went to cross state.
Oh, that's what made it federal.
Yes,
So you took it from East St. Louis, or were you in East St.
from St. Louis to East St. Louis.
East St. Louis.
So you feared that if
Now, St. Louis is in Missouri, and East St. Louis is where?
And East St. Louis is in Illinois.
Oh, okay.
well, I won't try to rationalize what your thinking was back then, because that'll be like me rationalizing why I went to prison 3 times. There's no rationalizing what I was thinking, because I wasn't thinking. But in hindsight, I see a lot of the mistakes I made. But I think for a viewing artist, if one of the first things I would want to know is, you didn't see yourself as a victim in
Well,
that
I saw
situation?
myself as a victim, but I saw myself also as a person who has a past history with the law. And I also saw myself as being a black person and committed this crime.
What about the witnesses that were there that could collaborate your story to see and your wounds?
Yes, those are things that wasn't totally looked upon in a long-range aspect, but most of the people there was basically criminals themselves.
Right,
So,
they didn't want, yeah, okay.
so, you know, the whole time while the state was investigating the case, no one was saying anything.
So were you caught like soon thereafter?
Actually, when the federal government came in and started saying that they was investigating the case, that's when they told me that they have statements from people saying that I committed this offense. They said, we pretty much know what happened. We want you to tell us what happened. I shut down and wouldn't tell them. And they said, well, you leaving us with no other choice but to put this case together with our own ideals. So they didn't charge me with anything. A month went by, and they still hadn't charged me. All they was doing was just follow me around.
Yeah, that's what they did back then, which was work, because that puts a lot of pressure on a person.
Right. And so, and that pressure worked. I ended up moving to New Orleans.
Yeah.
And they put a charge on me for a flight to avoid prosecution. And when I got a warrant, a flight to avoid prosecution, and when I got a warrant.
I never heard of that, flight to avoid. How you know you're going to be prosecuted?
Maybe they told him don't leave.
Right. No, they never told me.
You said that on TV. That's not a law. That's not a crime to leave town. People have freedom to move if you've not been charged with a crime. That's TV. There's no such thing as that. You have a right now to leave wherever you want to go, unless you're on parole.
Right.
But you have a right to move around if you haven't been charged with a crime.
Now, they claimed that the warrant was under advisement at something of that nature.
Oh, at the time.
At the
but
time.
You didn't know it.
And I didn't know it. And they said that when they got the warrant, they couldn't locate me.
But you'd already moved.
I'd already moved, you know. So I was in New Orleans for almost a year and got a charge with flight to avoid prosecution in New Orleans and brought back to St. Louis for flight to avoid prosecution.
So they made up something to get you back.
Exactly. Then when I got back, they charged me with kidnapping for the purpose of murder.
So that was the federal trial. Okay. Did you have a trial or did you plead?
I had a trial.
Why did you do that?
Dumb.
I mean, did you think, was there a plea? Since that, I don't know anything about the Fed system.
They
the
actually
plea bargaining days. So
they offered a plea of 45 years.
Okay.
At that time, I didn't take the 45 years, and I looked at the 45 years as being.
Yeah, you were too young.
Oh yeah, so most definitely 45 years. So.
And someone had already told you that 45 years Fed time was like 43 years.
It wasn't back then.
It wasn't?
Back
No,
then.
we had a
Remember
parole
the
system.
The system changed after that. He's
had a
telling
parole
you,
system.
he's educating you about something that you don't know about.
Okay, so tell me what would you have done on a 45?
Well, really, on 45 years, you have to do 10 years before you even see the parole board.
Okay.
It was like our system.
Oh, okay.
By me having even 100 years, I couldn't see the parole board until I did 10 years. What is very good about one sentence over another sentence is what is your 2/3 date. Under the old law, your 1/3 date is your 10-year date to see the parole board. Your 1/3 date is when you initially see the parole board with a larger sentence. If you have a small sentence, of course, you see them immediately. With my sentence, or 45 years, I still have to do 10 years either way it go. But at 45 years, I probably would, at the max that I would have to do is probably 25 years.
25.
But under the old law, they had what is called, at 30 years, what is called mandatory parole.
Release. Yeah, they had mandatory.
Right,
I knew
mandatory parole, right? Now, at 30 years, they had nothing to really justify keeping me in there further than that. But of course, you did have the Globe Board Network.
Right.
You have, I didn't have a lot of shots. I only had 3 shots in 36 years.
What's that?
The shots, the infractions.
Okay. Just
inside
3?
the-
Wow.
3. I had 2 for possession of marijuana in 1983. And then I had another infraction in 1990, which was a paper bag assault. A chaplain said I hit him with a lunch sack. So those was my infractions while I was incarcerated.
That's not very much.
And they was trying to use those things to say that they believe I was still a threat because of my case.
Were you housed in the same place all those 36 years?
No, I started off in Terre Haute,
Where is that?
Indiana.
Okay.
They called it the Gladiator School
Why?
because there was a lot of stabbings there.
Wow. And then from there, where'd you go?
I went from there to Memphis, FCI, and then to Pekin,
Where is that?
Illinois. Pekin is in Illinois, northern Illinois by Peoria. Then Greenville, Illinois, and that is right next, close to St. Louis.
What was the population ratio versus black-white, which is you seen most of the time you was incarcerated?
It started out with the majority of the guys incarcerated at that time when I first started out was majority was white.
I would guess that.
And they was importing blacks into the federal system. They would bring blacks in from the state of Texas, from Louisiana, from Washington, D.C. They was renting out cells to the state.
Right, I remember. Yeah.
You see, so, but then when this
Crack epidemic.
crack thing came, right,
Oh, you're right.
and mandatory minimum sentence came out
Population shifted.
tremendously.
So when you went in '81, it was majority white?
Yes.
Was it majority murders and kidnaps? What kind of crimes were they back then in '81, if you can remember?
Mostly bank robbers, mostly organized crime type of offenses.
How did you fare in prison?
Actually, it was educational. Actually, in prison, older people, since I was a youngster, they were educating me about how people on the street are committing these crimes and not getting any money. We're committing a crime and we're getting large sums of money. So it was an educational aspect of we are involved with shootouts and so on over very minor things.
Now, what do you mean by that? That's what they tell you was happening?
No, as a street person, we'll go to a club and we'll get in a shootout over some girl.
Right.
These guys is in organized crime. They're making money and making plenty of money
Lots of money.
and without any violence. And if it is some violence, you won't hear about it.
Right. So they're not in jail for that. They're in jail for the crime, for the
RICO
organized
acts,
crime.
organized crime.
RICO, organized crime.
RICO crimes.
Bank robbery.
So
something
they
big.
risk versus reward was they at least was trying to make a financial gain with the risk of going to prison versus us being here, saying blacks, and our crimes didn't have anything to do with money.
Well, actually, they have a more of a structure that you couldn't commit a crime without whoever their bosses or leaders were telling them to do so. And anybody that stepped outside of that, that did something outside of that, would be punished for that.
Organized crime.
Right. So as they were showing the difference between a freelance criminal just running around and running amok and actually having someone with structure. So that was very educational for me because I saw how the level of rationalizing, you're having value on yourself, on your life. Not only that, I had a whole lot of time. These guys didn't have a whole lot of time.
And they're making millions.
And they're making millions, you see. When I
You
first,
let your temper get you.
yes,
When you're realizing
Pride.
pride, ignorance, yeah.
Yeah.
And got you all this time when they got all this money, and then they might be doing 5 years or 10
Exactly.
years, and you doing 100 years for, killing someone, which was terrible.
Yes.
But she didn't have to die.
she didn't have to die.
Right.
I had an opportunity that I could have took the knife and left.
Right.
But because of all this buildup that's going on inside of me, all this pride and
Anger.
and the people's looking at me and they was like, look
You
how
got
she
to be
did
bad.
you, and
That's unusual for a woman to have a knife, though. I mean, that's unusual.
I think someone gave it to her.
Okay. But that's still unusual
Yeah,
to me.
yeah. But
That she would actually stab you.
yeah, my whole aspect was that I wanted to change not only my attitude but my perspective, and I wanted to become more educated. And I went to school. Of course, I was a school of learning a lot what I could from other people, but I also went to college. I graduated from Vincennes University. Took some courses at Ohio University and Indiana State University and so on. And but still, there was a lot more missing of education. You can learn so much of the books, Taking a test, it's pretty simple. But living life was the things that I didn't know.
How did you keep hope alive, knowing you had 100 years? That's your whole life. That's a life sentence. How did you mentally live? How did you maintain?
Very
the will
good
to
question.
live?
That's a very good question, because that was the most challenging aspect of the prison system. You have the physical part, then you have the psychological part, right? A lot of times while you're in prison, you become is so much engrossed in filth and craziness.
Right.
It's total different world.
Yeah.
And you become so much assumed by that, you begin to think life don't have the value to it as it's supposed to be for others. So, become depressed. But at the same time, you also are motivated from the fact that when I first went to prison, guys was telling me, say, this is the most that they would make you do
On life.
on life.
And they gave you some sense of hope?
And that was 30 years. And this is a person who's never did prison time before. The most time I ever did before was 9 months on a year sentence. So I'm looking at that 30 years and I'm like, how am I gonna do that?
Yeah, that's a lot of time. You're not even 30 years old.
No, I'm not even 30 years old. You see, so psychologically, it was very challenging.
I bet.
At times, you contacting family members. You even have some people, they don't even want to talk to you no more.
Right, yeah.
Say, I was a write-off.
Right. A life, 100 years is forever.
Actually, when I got to 25 years, many people started seeing that I wasn't coming home. So they pretended that they was giving support, but they felt I would never come home no way. Many of them never contacted at all. So I realized then that I have to create new friends, new settings. So I made it a point to get to know people that knew more and had more than I did.
You know, we got to talk again. We got to get into the prison life, but I want to close because we have 5 minutes to talk about this. You came in with a walker, and tell me, why are you on a walker?
I started having complications with my leg. Played very athletic sports and so on. I started going to medical to try to find out what was going on.
How many years ago was that?
2009, I started speaking about the pain. 2011, my leg was removed because of gangrene was up to the calf muscle in my leg.
So you got your leg amputated.
Right.
Okay. Do they ever know what was wrong with it?
They said that my artery had become filled with plaque and cholesterol. And they call it thickening of the arteries, peripheral artery disease. And it's when your arteries become so filled with fatty tissue, it restricts your blood from flowing.
Is it treatable if it's diagnosed early?
Sure, you can put a stent in there and open up your arteries and cause blood to flow. You can actually give pills to reduce the cholesterol that's in your system and where your blood would flow. There's numerous of things they could do, like 3 or 4 things they could do. But in my case, they could never figure out vascular problems. They was never trained for vascular issues.
What prison were you in when you were having these vascular issues?
Greenville, FCI. Okay. Yeah. So.
So it went undiagnosed for a lot of years.
No, I was going back to medical on a regular, and they could never figure out what was the problem. At the same time.
So basically, you had to get the problem cut off.
Yeah, it turned gangrene. Gangrene, my foot literally died, suffocated.
For lack of blood? For
lack of blood. Then it started coming back up the leg.
Okay. And it'll kill you if they don't stop it.
Well, let's say that it was on my left side, maybe going up to the heart.
Right.
On the right side, it would have to go over to that area. But
so which leg did you lose?
I lost my right leg.
Now let me ask you this: do you have a prosthetic, or do you? Okay. Oh yeah.
I hear you
It's
knocking.
all the way up. Yeah, it's a long one. It's all the way up to your hip.
It's all the way up to here.
Oh wow, you got a
Wow.
prospect up to your pelvic bone.
Yes.
Wow, I hear wood
To the
all way
waist.
to your waistline. That's a big prosthetic.
Yes.
Wow.
To the waistline.
Wow.
So after spending 36 years in prison and having to return home, that made it even more challenging.
Made it even more challenging. It even made it more challenging to do 5 more years more past that 30 years with the leg off.
I bet that was very difficult.
Yes, especially when you're in prison, you're going to have conflict with other people. And I have this terrible thing that I don't like running.
Right, right. And I'm sure prison cells are not made for walkers.
No.
So would you have to use that
Well,
crutches?
actually, I used a wheelchair.
Use a wheelchair.
I went to the handicap, the wheelchair aspect.
Okay.
You know, I got the walker in the later part of this aspect of losing a leg and been using it. But since I've been out of prison, I haven't been in the wheelchair. I've been only using the walker itself.
That's good. That's good. We have 1 minute actually. So your story is so interesting. It's so much more worthy than 1 hour. So we got to do this again. Danny, thank you for bringing Mr. Jamil in, and you want to try to say something, and we'll try to get to him if we can cut that.
Well, I'm going to keep it real short. Reason me and Jamil here is we're here to share our experiences about life after prison and dealing with some of the guilt, some of the shame that goes along with it, and integrating with our families. Some of the challenges you are facing. Only been out a month. I've been out since 2004. I still face some of those same challenges. And I welcome them. Me and you keep having this conversation, supporting each other, because I'm formerly incarcerated.
All right.
And I'm here to support you, and I can learn from you, from your experience also. And I thank you for having the courage to speak truth to power and tell your real truth.
Yes. Well, I think that due to the fact that Miss Vivian King is so attractive, that also helped me to
I wanna come
here
back.
and to speak to her.
That's a little caveat on the table. I agree with that.
Well, I just want to say this. We have learned a lot tonight from Jamil, who did 36 years in the federal prison system. He is the only person I know that is on federal parole. When I started practicing federal law in the 90s, they had changed. They no longer had a parole system. Like currently, there's no parole system. You do your time, and then there's a supervised release. So you do your time, though. And so the system has changed completely. We know that this is a great story. We will watch Jamil. He's 61. He just got out this year after being in prison since 1981. Just think about how long ago that was. That's before cell phones. I got out of college in 1980.
Reagan was president.
It was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. So hopefully that we can learn. We've learned a lot tonight from 36 years in federal prison, and we will talk to Jamil again. Thank you for watching Truth and Justice with Vivian King. Good night.
Very good.
Thank you for tuning in again. Tonight we have something